We do record these for posterity. This is Bob Mader, Chairman of the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'm very happy to have everybody here. Tonight's topic is, is ACS, what it means for instructors. We have four of the people that were very instrumental in developing this, along with a host of others. They're not the only ones. Phil Poynor, our NAFI's Vice President of Governmental and Industry Relations, will be hosting tonight. I'm going to step back and monitor for questions and conversation. The rules of the game are, the mics are all muted. Start Meeting has improved their product. You can unmute yourself by going, if you're online, if you're voice over internet, you can turn the microphone on and off. I will ask, as always, please, if you're not talking, mute yourself, because otherwise we get a lot of back chatter, a lot of reverb, and things like that. So I'm going to ask everybody to be polite and do so, because I don't want to play hall monitor. So with that, Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce our guest tonight.
Okay, I'd be glad to. Very pleased tonight that we've got three really good guests to be on our webinar. First is Susan Parson, AFS 3A, is Special Technical Assistant to the Director of the FAA Flight Standards Service, where she manages the Director's communications and a variety of other tasks. She's editor of the FAA Safety Briefing magazine, the lead FAA representative in the ACS project, and Susan is an ATP-rated pilot, active flight instructor, and a self-described border collie that keeps all of the several dozen members of the ACS working group all headed more or less the same direction and tightly focused on our tasks. So, Susan, welcome tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Next, any of you that have used ASA training materials have seen the name Jackie Spanitz. Jackie's the Director of Curriculum Development at Aviation Supplies and Academics, ASA. Jackie was a charter member of the very first activity that's led to the ACS, and that was being a member of the Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee that authorized the creation of the Airman certification standards of the working group, and has been a part of that process since the very beginning. Her official capacity is she's the ACS Workgroup Subdivision Lead for Private, Instrument, Commercial, and the ATP ACS Development Committee, as well as the Handbook Review Committee, and we'll talk about that. That's a part of the process many of you probably haven't really heard much about yet. She's also on the AMT ACS Workgroup. That's another thing on the instructor side. Many of us probably weren't aware that the project isn't just for pilot standards, but it's also including other certification of airmen, such as mechanics. And finally, and Jackie, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Phil. Happy to be here.
And finally, for the introductions, John King, I think, is pretty well known in the industry, co-founder and co-owner and co-chairman of King Schools. King Schools first established in 1975 and today is the world's leading producer of aviation training videos and computer software. John is a member of the ACS Working Group and has been especially interested in the integration of risk management into pilot training and testing. So good evening to you out on the southern part of the West Coast, John.
John, are you here? Oh, my.
All right, and I'm trying on the phone this time. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Right. Loud and clear, John.
Sorry about that, John. I don't know what happened. Anyway.
Well, you did a great job of the introductions. Thank you very much. It's fun to be here.
Glad to have you. And for those that don't know, one unique thing about John, I understood a lot of this, but until I went onto the website today, I didn't understand the full ramifications. Is John and Martha are the first and I guess still only people to have every FAA pilot or instructor rated certificate or rating. So in very esteemed ground in that area. What I'd like to do to start the conversation tonight, and what I have envisioned for the discussion, is first to get to know the people involved in the committee a little bit and what have been our motivations in working on it, and then to move into sort of where we are and what we've done and get to the point that's the title of the topic, which is here we are on day one of ACS. Where are we going from here, and what have we done so far? So what I'd like to first is to kick around the room. John, I wonder, I know you've had the especially strong interest in the risk management part of the process. What motivated you to get involved in that and to spend the incredible amount of time that you spent up until now working on the group?
Well, Phil, Martha and I used to travel around the country doing a circuit of cities teaching pilots, and it was not uncommon for us to return to a city, and somebody would say, "Oh, did you hear about Bob?" No, what happened to Bob? Well, he got killed in an airplane accident. And this happened with some frequency. It kind of speaks badly of our flight instruction, I guess, or our ground instructions, what we were doing. But the point is that we began to realize that flying airplanes is a risky business, and that maybe we weren't doing as good a job of preparing people for it as we could. And at the same time, while we were seeing people hurt themselves in the airplanes and being very surprised about it, at the same time, we were having to prepare people for an FAA written exam, which asked tricky and trivial and obscure questions, and the things that really weren't helping them be a safer, more capable pilot. And so we felt that the aviation community needed to focus on helping people understand and identify and mitigate the risks of flying, and get rid of some things that were distracting them from doing that.
Fantastic. We really appreciate having you on the committee and my involvement with it. I've certainly learned a lot from you in the discussions regarding risk management and some of the things we've been doing, and that certainly formed a big part of the ACS system. Jackie, I'm curious about you. What was your motivation in getting involved?
Our motivation stems also from the FAA knowledge exam. ASA produces training materials which prepare people for the FAA knowledge exam and then moving on to the check ride. And we found that people were doing things as independent steps. So they would go to ground school and learn how to fly an airplane, and they would go to flight training and learn how to operate on the tarmac and in the cockpit. And then they would separately prepare for an FAA knowledge exam, check that box, and then separately go prepare for their check ride or their practical exam. And it seemed and was very disjointed. We felt that those things should be cohesive and lead from one to the other. We also thought that if somebody was preparing appropriately for the airplane, they should by default pass the FAA knowledge exam and pass their check ride. So rather than having disjointed tests, we thought the training and testing ought to be directly correlated so that if somebody is a safe, competent pilot, they should by default be successful with the necessary tests and certification. So that's what drove us to get involved.
Oh, fantastic. And that, I know, is from when I first started instructing back, goodness, almost 30 years ago, was always one of the concerns that I had in my personal instruction was how we could get the student to focus on being able to integrate both the knowledge side of it along with the manipulation of the airplane. Susan, I know you and I go back actually almost to the same point in time in this general area. My involvement started with the rewrite of 141 and 61 and the early development of what became FITS. What's been your background on that and interest in being this involved in it?
Well, I've had a grudge against the old version of the knowledge test since the first one I took. I hated being told, as I was in ground school, that, okay, you're just going to have to learn this for the test, but you're never going to need it in the airplane. And I hated having to say that when I taught ground school. So when I came to the FAA in 2004, I tried various ways, but the bottom line is that the opportunity arose, a few stars aligned in May of 2011, and those that didn't align, that was where the border collie part came in. We made them align so that we could start a process of trying to have the knowledge test become a useful and meaningful part of the certification process. So this has been a labor of love for, I think, all of us. because we all care about aviation, we all care about safety, we care about good quality training, and that's what we're aiming to get.
Fantastic. I think one of the things I'd like to interject here, just as a comment, I've picked up on some of the boards that are out there, that there's not a complete understanding, but as far as the industry participants, all of us that are participating in that aren't compensated in any way by the FAA. Many of the people are working for companies, other of us, like myself, and a couple of the people from SAFE and a couple of the volunteer groups are working totally without any compensation. We're just doing it because we see the need of getting involved. And so I think that's been one of the real motivating factors is we've seen the need for corrections and improvements, and particularly something we're going to talk about a little bit later tonight, and that's to set up a system so that there's a continuous evaluation and development of these standards over time rather than a one-time big project. The thing gets put on the shelf and doesn't get revisited until years down the road when there are problems coming up again. Well, here we are on day one of the implementation of the standards. I'd like to do sort of a figurative show of hands, and if anybody has a point you can respond, and Bob will let me know about it. But I'm curious here in this first day if anybody's had any live experience with the ACS. In other words, a student that went for a knowledge test, or you were doing a final preparation for them to take a test, or if they've gone for the practical test. I'd be interested in perhaps later getting your experiences in that. I think it's also a good time to look backwards for a minute and see what's been done to date in developing the ACS and the process. The process affects training, knowledge, training, and testing, what you should know, risk management training and testing, or what you should consider, and skills training or testing, or what you should do. Susan, I know you have a couple of slides prepared on that we've got queued up. Would you like to begin and go over the material that you have on the slides and discuss that?
Sure. As soon as you pop them up, I will be glad to talk.
Yep, Bob?
Sorry about that. That was in the email you sent me, correct?
Right.
It was.
Yeah. Bear with me one moment. Phil, why don't you do a little bit of, pardon the pun, Phil here.
I can point out the difficulty of doing rehearsals when we're spread all over the country and all working at different things and trying to coordinate on it. Can you start discussing that, Susan, before we get the slides up, assuming they're going to come up here in a minute or two?
Yeah,
yep.
Oh, there they are.
Right.
There they are.
Okay. Some of this, if you've looked at the if you've looked at the wings course or some of the material that has been online on the FAA Airman testing webpage in various forms, really for the last 18 months, we really have been trying to work with our industry partners to communicate all about the ACS as we have been going along, so that nobody would be surprised right here at the implementation point. So this slide I've put some things together to just make it a summary of what the ACS actually is. And you'll see right there, it's the single source set of standards for both the knowledge test and the practical test. Obviously, the PTS was really about the practical test. There wasn't a standard for knowledge testing, which is why we ended up with questions that were, let's just say that they were somewhat irrelevant. So what the ACS does is it integrates and connects the certification standards for knowledge, risk management, and skill. And we like to talk about that as what you should know, consider, and do. So that is the standards. And then the ACS coding system, which we've explained in previous webinars, and it's in the WINGS course and the online presentation. The coding system is brilliant, Jackie. The coding system it assigns a unique code to each task element in the ACS. And that coding system allows us to make sure that standards are connected to guidance. That would be the FAA Handbooks, and also to test questions. We've had a lot of people asking over the last few weeks, really, so when are the tests going to change? And what I've always said, and it's in the frequently asked questions, for the past 2 test cycles, every active question on the private pilot airplane and the instrument rating airplane knowledge test has already been lined up with the corresponding ACS. So that means that we long ago got rid of questions like you see on the end there, the height of blowing sand. That actually was a question before we got rid of it. We have eliminated a vast number of irrelevant questions, outdated questions, things that the bottom line is that now we look at every question in light of the ACS, and if it doesn't match up with a task element, we amend the question or we delete it, so that anybody who's studying the ACS can be confident that they're going to be prepared to take the knowledge test and pass it. So that's this slide just shows how everything is intended to fit together in a way that it never did before. If you want to move to the next slide, Bob. Okay, here we go.
There you go.
Thank you. So we talked about the coding, and if you look at in the box over on the right-hand side, and I cannot give enough credit to Jackie for coming up with this system. It's beautiful. It works brilliantly. And right now it is being used tremendously. It's just being used in the background to make sure that questions are lined up with guidance and with standards. As soon as the FAA gets a new test management system, we should be able to print those codes on the Airman Knowledge Test Report, and they will replace those PLT codes that everybody's familiar with. You see those in the box on the left-hand side. So there is no one-to-one correlation between the codes because the PLT codes are connected to references, so there are lots of them, and I suspect that most of you know that they're not nearly as useful as perhaps they were intended to be. So we did look at, and this is something that we've given to pilot examiners and as a way to say, here's how you can still use the ACS and the learning statement codes together. You can look up the subject of the PLT code, but rather than trying to find, which reference it's in or fish around for is it this or is it that or is it the other, you can look in the ACS to see which, and in this case we're using airspace, you can see which tasks line up with airspace, so you narrow the scope of the material for retesting. But then this is really important for both training and testing. You can retrain and retest the material in the context of an area of operation and task. And I think we all understand that people learn things that they think are meaningful and relevant, and if we can connect it to something that you're doing, so like planning a cross-country flight or pre-flight preparation, then we're going to be targeting what people really need to know much more clearly. Jackie, since you invented the system, did I miss anything? You want to add anything to that?
No, I think you hit it spot on. We went, years ago, the code system started out as a subject matter knowledge code, and those were tied directly to references or the FAA handbooks. And it was very specific. It wasn't just a title of a book. It was also a chapter, a subheading, and in some cases a specific sentence or paragraph within that book. So it became an exercise of trying to research where the test writer might have been looking when they wrote that test question. And that can become very cumbersome because things like airspace is covered in multiple documents. It's covered in the AIM, it's covered in the PHAC, it's covered in a couple of places. And if somebody didn't remember what they read in a particular document, they may not be prepared for that question. And that is not at all the intent. The intent is for somebody to understand airspace in a broad enough sense that they can actually apply that knowledge to something that they have to do. So if it's a matter of planning across country or making en route decisions or post-flight. So the idea of transitioning from subject matter knowledge codes and learning statement codes to the ACS was to get away from having a code tied to a reference and instead having it tied to something that somebody has to demonstrate during their practical exam.
And Jackie, I'm going to jump in here, Jackie and Susan. Martin Fass, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Martin, asked, and you answered it online, Jackie, but I just wanted to bring it up in audio. He said the last 2 private test cycles are in accordance with, he asked how often how long does a cycle last? Jackie said that it's 2 cycles, and Susan did, excuse me. Sorry about that. And Jackie, do you want to answer that?
Sure. So the question was if Susan stated that the FAA knowledge exam for private pilot airplane have been updated to reflect an ACS exam, so to speak, for the last 2 cycles. And that would represent 8 months. Yeah, and the instrument too. And that would represent 8 months. Typically, the FAA rolls new tests 3 times a year. Typically, that's June, October, and February. And so we are looking at an 8-month window where those tests have been cleaned up to reflect task elements as defined by the ACS. And when people ask me that question, what does that really mean in terms of a test? To me, the short answer is it's a better test. So the biggest impact or the biggest change I've seen for the old test versus the new is the stuff that I would have considered meaningless or irrelevant is gone. It's not on the test anymore. So we haven't seen new things or different things introduced.
Yeah, let me pick up for that. Bob, if you can go back 1 slide, go back to the chart slide where you showed just a second, because I want to make a point, and then I'll come back to this. So first
and
of all,
if I could interrupt you for one, Susan, if I could interrupt for 1 second. I've had a message come in that someone was asking how could they see the slides. If you are logged in through the start meeting, then the slides come up in the website for start meeting. That's the only way live that you can see them. If you're not able to see them now because you're only logged in on the phone and haven't come in online, as Bob mentioned, we will put up a copy of this and make it available so you'll be able to look at it later.
Okay. And Susan, am I on the right slide?
Yep. The reason I wanted you to bring this slide up is that I wanted to make a point. There's been some various misinformation, misunderstanding, communication about who's doing what. So I want to look at these 3 boxes and tell you who's doing what. So first of all, the standards. These standards have been developed through extensive collaboration between the industry and the ACS working group. The industry members of the ACS working group, and it includes pretty much every segment of the community. We've had slides up, and I think you'll see it on the FAA web page presentation. There's a list of all the individuals and organizations that have been involved in some way since this started in 2011. So the standards have been developed by a consensus process of people who are very, very active in aviation. I try to be, but no matter how hard I try, I cannot be nearly as active as some of our working group members. So this is no kidding, boots on the ground experience that went into developing the standards. The ACS working group has also done a massive amount of work in going through the various handbooks and making recommendations for how the FAA can update and improve them. We have taken pretty much all of those recommendations, and we're just pushing out new handbooks now. I need to check tomorrow to see where the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge is. The Airplane Flying Handbook has been significantly updated thanks to the working group's recommendations, especially in the area of maintaining aircraft control, stall spin. I mean, that has been very, very substantially overhauled. That one will be out in the fall, sort of late September, early October. The one place where the working group has not been involved, I've had people say, so you're outsourcing the questions? No. Everybody on this call can verify that the FAA is maintaining, the FAA is developing, revising, reviewing the questions. We have one, we call it an outside stakeholder, Dr. Kent Lovelace from the University of North Dakota. He has signed a non-disclosure agreement. He has a lot of training not only in aviation but also in what I call the dark art of test question development. He spent 10 years being trained and working on another professional exam review board. So he contributes enormously to the process of trying to frame questions to really ask what we want them to ask. So that is the only place and the only person where we have, or the only part, and there's only one person outside the FAA who works on the test questions. So, and we have him report back to the group periodically, not obviously on details, but just to verify to the group that when we have discussions, they are pretty ferocious sometimes, and we have real, we always get down to, with every question that we review, is this connected to the standard? Is it supported by guidance? And is this something that a pilot really needs to know? And we're also trying to calibrate things so that we're not asking private pilot level questions on commercial and above. So those are some of the many things that we're doing to try to improve this. And Bob, if you'll go to the next slide again with the coding system. Again,
hey, Susan, can I jump in real quick? I wanted to touch on the fact that I suspect many people might wonder then how would I have the information I have so that I can ask you questions when we get to the work group. Maybe you want to talk about the sample exams and how the FAA is communicating to the industry what's changing on the test.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. What we have done, the working group has given us a lot of recommendations on how we can best communicate what we're doing. So it's on the Airman testing page, and I know we've got a references slide coming up that has links to it. There is a document that is called What's New in Airman Testing. Every time there's a new test cycle, and we just did it again in June, we update that document to show what topics we have taken off the test. So this is one way that we communicate to, basically there are three ways we communicate to the community what they can expect to see on the test. The first one is, as Jackie mentioned, there are sample knowledge tests. The ones for private and instrument have sample ACS codes on them so people can see kind of how we're applying the codes. And we have been very careful with the private and instrument, because those are the ones that we've put the most time into so far, to make sure that those sample tests are as best we can do an accurate reflection of the real test. The second way is the What's New in Airman Testing, where we've communicated the topics that are no longer on the test and the kinds of questions that are no longer on the test. And you'll see when you look at that document that we've updated it quite a bit since we started that process. The third way, and I think this is really important for people to know, if you look at the ACS and the task elements that are in the ACS, if your applicant, if your student is well prepared in each of those areas, then that applicant is going to be absolutely prepared for both the knowledge test and the practical test, because we are not asking about anything that is not covered by one of those task elements. So you're not going to get any, and we've gotten away from what I call the multiple interpolations across 3 badly rendered charts to calculate a 2-knot difference in wind at altitudes you can't possibly reach in a GA airplane. So
that was my favorite question.
I know. Well, it wasn't mine, so it's gone. We've done a tremendous amount of work, but I keep saying this all the time. It is much better than it was, but it's not nearly as good as it is going to be once we get everything in place. So again, with the codes, they are already very much in use in keeping and getting the system aligned and keeping it aligned. But you can already use those codes, as you see on this slide, to narrow the scope and then to retrain and retest in the context of specific tasks. Bob, if you'll go to the next one. Okay, so the next 2 slides, this is covered in the frequently asked questions. I'm not going to read through everything on here. I think these will be made available subsequently, but as I said, in the frequently asked questions online, there's one that specifically lists all of these things. Most of the things that you'll see on this slide are showing the fact that in the private pilot airplane ACS, there were some things that were renamed, reorganized, or combined. Partly because you may have noticed that things like the runway safety task duplicated things in other tasks in the PTS, so got rid of that. You'll see special emphasis items. This is really important. There is no more special emphasis. They have all been incorporated into the relevant tasks, usually into the risk management section. You'll see some of the other renames and changes here. Another piece is you notice that a task without identifiers applies to everybody, but if it's a seaplane task, it will show in parentheses ASES and AMES, so you know what task applies. If you go to the next slide, please, Bob. Okay, this is more of the same, some of the things that have been renamed, but I do want to point out near the bottom, that next to the last bullet, slow flight installs the tolerance specifications discourage performing the maneuver with the stall horn activated. This has been a subject of great debate within the working group and the FAA, and the revision to the airplane flying handbook is going to reflect the specifications in that task. So that's the one that you might really look at as being a little different from what you're used to. But at least in my time in flying, the FAA has gone back and forth about what the tolerances for that task, and this is what has been settled on. So if you're going to take a look at something as being a little different from what you're used to, that's the one. The guidance coming out in October is going to reflect that. We just couldn't get those two pieces lined up right now. And then the final slide I have for you, if you'll go to that one, please. These are the go-to places. The first link, it goes to the general airman testing page. The second one is a specific ACS page. It's kind of like all things ACS are on that second link. There is a safety.gov course that's the ALC 449. And then the last thing you'll see there, we have set up a special mailbox that goes to what we call the ACS focus team. Up until about 10 minutes before I got on this call, I was working on questions that we got into that mailbox. If you have questions or concerns or something arises and it is not covered in the published material, like the frequently asked questions, all you need to do is send an email to us at that mailbox, and I promise you we will acknowledge it as quickly as we can and get you an answer, if not right away, very, very soon after.
Okay. Susan, I'm going to leave that slide up for everybody so they can copy it. In the meantime, David Schrader asks, are you going to explain the difference of the knowledge and skill tests that are laid out in the ACS? I'm not quite sure. I understand that one.
You worked on that a lot. I think Jackie, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can talk about that. So every task includes the objective and the references, which will be consistent with what the practical test standards had, and then the skills section, which is comparable to what would have been in the practical test standards. So the skill tasks are comparable to what you would have seen in the PTS. The knowledge task elements, those are the task elements which are typically demonstrated during the knowledge exam. And where those came from were the FAA test guides, the 8082 document, and the subject matter knowledge code or the learning statement code reference guide. Those knowledge elements were gleaned from those other knowledge exam documents and put here. So again, the knowledge tasks are typically those things that applicants will demonstrate during the knowledge exam, and the skill tasks are those things the applicant will demonstrate during the practical exam. There is crossover. If a skill says something like calculate or determine, that could be demonstrated during both the practical exam, during the oral portion, or during the knowledge exam. So it hasn't changed what applicants have to do today. It's just trying to further clarify what people have to know and what they're going to have to do and when.
And Jackie, I think that's a good point, that there's been quite a bit of misinformation floating around peer-to-peer, and that is people have the impression that they have to do every item in the knowledge section on the practical test. Could you explain a little bit about how that's intended to work?
Yeah. So the knowledge elements are those that will be candidates for the knowledge exam. The evaluator is then required to retest anything that was missed during the knowledge exam, which is defined by the Airman test report. The Airman test report will have the code that says the applicants missed these subjects. Those subjects in particular must be retested. And if somebody got 100%, then the evaluator must pick one knowledge, one risk, and then all of the skill elements. And that's not different than what the practical test standard requires today.
It's not. And Jackie, let me step in here too and say, so let me go back to, remember that the ACS, the reason it's bigger is that it's the single source for not just the practical test, but also the knowledge test, and those standards never existed before we had it now. So we have been very, very clear to all of the DPEs. This was in the DPE training that they got. It's in every PowerPoint presentation we've done anywhere and everywhere. The ACS does not change the conduct of the practical test, certainly not the flight portion. It definitely is not intended to make the practical test any longer than it is already. And in fact, we believe that by narrowing the focus, that it can streamline the conduct of the practical test. We prototyped for about 18 months with private and instrument in both Orlando and Seattle. We did not get any information at all suggesting that the practical test was any longer or really substantially any different. The difference was that the retesting and retraining of knowledge elements was more targeted. So we've given that guidance to DPEs, both in the training module that they got. It's going to be covered in the 8900 notice that it was supposed to have been published today. I don't know if it actually got out, but we're trying to make everything as we're trying to make everything as clear as possible in terms of this is not a 6-hour check ride at all. And Jackie, well, the other thing I just noticed on chat, somebody wanted an explanation of the codes. So maybe you could, I don't know if we have one handy that we could put up and explain, but that might be useful to go through.
Sure, I can do that. Bob, if you go back 2 slides where we have the correlation of the codes, PLT codes to the ACS codes, I can just use that as a reference. Right there, perfect, thanks. So yeah, I can explain what the numbering system represents. The PLT codes you used to have to go to, or today you still do have to go to a reference, a legend, the Learning Statement Reference Guide, or the Knowledge Test Guide to figure out what PLT 162 means. So there's no, you can't decipher that code unless you look up what the definition is. We tried to get away from that with the ACS code so that it would be more self-descriptive and not require a legend to figure out. So what those represent is the PA stands for a private airplane. The next group of digits represents the area of operation, the 2 or the 5. The letter after that represents the task, and the last component represents the task element. So it will be an S for skill, a K for knowledge, or an R for risk management. So again, it's the title of the ACS, followed by the area of operation, followed by the task, followed by the task element. So if somebody gets their Airman test report, once these codes start getting printed, they can go directly to their ACS, find what that code represents, and retrain or retest in context.
Great. Thank you. Phil?
Yes, sir.
Been a lot of questions coming in. Do you want to distribute a couple of these? I'm going to go back to that resource slide in the meantime for everybody.
I'm going to do a couple of those, and also want to get to the risk management a little bit. We've talked about the changes in the knowledge side and want to spend some. Let me see a couple of the questions that I saw coming up that there were questions about. One was a question that, well, we are somewhere providing what the codes mean. And Jackie just sort of went over that, and that is they're pretty self-explanatory once you understand the way they're laid out. Can you put that back up, the page, Bob, that had all the codes on it?
There you go.
This code on the right-hand side, for example, the one at the top is explaining it's out of the private airplane. It's what task 1, element D, and it's a knowledge item 1. And so with that information, it really drives you pretty closely as to what it is you're looking at. Once you get used to working with it, that's one of the things that's really nice about it is you know exactly where you need to go look, because there'll be a definition of what the task is. And once you see that, then it's pretty obvious what the specific content is, as opposed to the current PLT codes. Most of those instructors have had the experience where you get the failure report or the missed question report back from the knowledge test, and you're supposed to review it with the applicant. And by the way, a question came in on that. Do we still have to do that process? And the answer is yes. You still have to review the elements and endorse the applicant when they go for the practical if they missed any questions on their knowledge. But now once you've got the code under the old system, you really didn't know what it meant, like the example that we mentioned earlier with airspace. That could drive you anywhere, and usually the conversation goes something like, well, what did you miss on airspace? I don't know. I don't think I missed any. Well, was it like Class G? No, I don't think so. Well, was it what visibility you need? No, and when you're through, neither the instructor or the student really got anything out of it, so you just sort of mumble some stuff about airspace and sign it off that you reviewed it. With the material that we're going to have now, it's going to be much more focused to exactly what that topic is so you can explore it properly.
So, Phil, if I could continue on with what you said, that code, the first one, as an example, PA.1.D.K1, what that stands for is private airplane, area of operation 1, which is pre-flight preparation, task D, which is cross-country flight planning, and then K1, the knowledge task element, which is described as route planning, including consideration of special use airspace. So in that way, you're able to really narrow down exactly what the applicant didn't know so that you can teach them then in the context of when you would have covered cross-country flight planning anyways.
Okay, thanks. And that, I'm glad you had that on the top of your head because I've admired that about you through this whole process. Jackie pretty well invented the coding system that we're using, and it really is spectacular the way it drills right into what you need to know. We are fairly constrained for time, so I want to make sure we get to the whole area of topics. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going back to something, Susan? Was there one other thing you wanted to look at? Okay, I'll take that as...
I think we lost Susan.
Now.
I'm going to ask Susan to redial back. I'm going to send her a text to ask her to redial back in. We seem to have lost her for a moment.
Yeah, I saw a message pop up that she lost all the audio about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So while we work on that, John, you've been one of the real proponents of the risk management. I wonder if you could see how this is going to work in the training and testing environment. That's been one of the big things that has been discussed, comments like it's artificial and you can't teach it and that sort of thing. I wonder if you might talk about that, what your thoughts are, and you've been a lot more closely involved with that particular piece. So I think everybody would really like to have your views on that. John King?
Let me go through the list here, see if he's there.
Okay.
One moment. Phil, while we're trying to get John back on, there was a question that came in about references. If there was a cross-reference from ACS codes to the relevant reference material in the And the short answer is there's no direct cross-reference where you can determine PLT 161 equals this ACS code. There's no cross-reference in that way. But you can still find the reference material. Part of our work, the working group review, included reviewing all of the reference documents themselves. We researched every single task element and made sure that the references associated with the task accurately provide a resource for applicants to retrain. So the references within the task themselves is where people will go to retrain or learn about that task element. And those lists of references were narrowed down in scope from what they currently exist in the practical test standards because, for example, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge has been updated to include much more extensive coverage of subjects. So some of those older advisory circulars dropped off. We didn't need to use any of those old ACs anymore. Instead, we're focusing more on the FAA handbooks that are produced. So the reference material is found in the task itself, right below the objective.
Okay. And to make a comment on that, at this point we haven't said much about the handbooks and the other doctrine documents that are out there, training documents. But one of the things that to me was really exciting to get involved in this project was we literally went through every reference training document from Airplane Flying Handbook to Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and so on, and really edited that and tied it in to what we were producing on the learning objectives so that it's I think they're much more efficient documents now. They really focus on what's important and not wandering all off base and stuff that's never going to really be relevant. But it also gives you the ability when you go into it to really focus with some well-written, well-edited, current material. And that to me has been one of the most exciting things is to finally have some good up-to-date documents. Have we gotten John back yet, Bob? Okay. Let's see. I had some questions. Let me find that. These are some questions that I've seen floating around, and I'll just throw them out to whoever wants to answer them, Susan or Jackie, or if John comes up. Let's see. First question is, if the ACS is only an enhanced version of an outdated PTS, then why was the PTS not involved? And you might tie that in with the second question that came in, and that is, since we're not using the PTS anymore, why are we talking about it? What does it have to do that it actually is now the ACS? So either or both of you?
Usually I answer that, Phil, by explaining that the PTS is really in the ACS. So if you're looking for, if you look at a page of an ACS, it's going to look very familiar in that you still have your task followed by your references, your objective, and then you'll see the PTS task elements under the skill area. And then the ACS builds on that to layer in the knowledge and the risk management. So the PTS is kind of included within the ACS itself. And then as far as it being outdated, we've mentioned a couple of ways that the work group made improvements in language and consolidating task elements, updating references, and so forth to make sure that it is current and relevant and meaningful to the certification exercise.
Not all of the PTS was outdated. I always like to use the term barnacled because you probably noticed that the list of special emphasis areas was long and it kept getting longer, and not everything in special emphasis, say, applied to private pilot airplanes. So one of the things that the ACS does is it puts those quote-unquote special emphasis items in the context, and it only in the context of a task, and it only shows them where they are relevant. I just saw a question come in. It was for me, which handbooks are going to be updated and when? Is there a place that you can go to view this information? We have just put on that the Airman testing page. If you go into that What's New document that you see in the bottom, in there is another link that will take you to a chart that shows you what our intentions are with regard to publication. That's something that we put up just as recently as June 1st, I think is when that went up. So that's where you can go to view the the information as best we can tell.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. John King, are you here? Okay, we're still trying to find out what happened to his connection. We will find him yet. Go ahead.
Okay, and feel free when you get him in to interrupt, and we'll get to him. Let's see, another question that I've seen out here, I think it's a good one that we can address, is there's been discussion, well, how do you even know this stuff's going to work? Did you test any of it or try any of it, or what did you do to verify that these changes are actually going to be able to be used in the field and by examiners and so on? So I know, Susan, you've been heavily involved in the prototyping and the testing, so could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we started in 2 summers ago in Florida. We started with a small group, and then we expanded with a private pilot airplane ACS. We had the Orlando FSDO heavily involved. We had groups that eventually involved DPEs, aviation safety inspectors, Part 141 and Part 61 schools. So we tried to hit a broad range of people. So we had students who had never trained with anything but the ACS. The instructors used it. The DPEs used it. We did surveys afterward that were developed by the folks in our group with academic credentials. So even though the sample sizes were not terribly large, the view was that given the fact that it was, I think they used the term homogeneous population, that it was, we could actually take something from those results. But there was, I was very surprised. I was expecting a lot of people to be negative because it was new and different. But all of you, my fellow folks on the ACS working group, you all have heard the same reports that I have. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People who were training with it didn't know the difference, but it made sense to them. Instructors loved it because it was a much, much better map to what they needed to teach. Evaluators loved it because it provided a lot more guidance on what to ask about for risk management. And they found that both the quality of the applicants' preparation and the way that the instructors had prepared them was noticeably different with the ACS. Jackie, the instrument took place in your territory, the IFR capital of the world. So do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, we had the Seattle FSDO participate in the instrument ACS prototype along with the Florida FSDO, Orlando FSDO participated, and we had individuals, Part 141, Part 61. We had the airlines. We had a number of participants go through the documents and provide excellent feedback, and yeah, they loved it. The single most popular question I got was, when can we start using this for all of our students?
Okay, John, did I hear you come on? John King, I know you hear me. Let me.
Yeah, we heard that a lot. You know, how soon can we have this, and why haven't we always done it this way? And that's because we had to think of it first.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Hey, yeah. we have John King. We have man from the dark side of the moon. I apologize, John. I don't know what happened. Sorry about that.
This is the Phantom John King. One comment I want to make is the ACS codes won't be on the knowledge test reports for a while, so it'll be a while before folks see those. And another thing is if people would like to know what a practical test would look like under ACS, particularly how risk management would be handled, King School has created one. Mary Shue was on the ACS working group. She's a DPE. She was we made a video with her doing a model performance as an examiner, and me trying like hell to do a good performance as an applicant. And it's a demonstration of how risk management would be handled in the context of the PTS using ACS standards. And it's available for everybody else for $139, to NAFI members $29. So just call King Schools and tell them you're a NAFI member, and you'll get this video that shows what we think a practical test would look like using ACS standards with emphasis on risk management.
John, it's come up a couple of times. I'm going to preempt Phil just a little bit here. Sorry, Phil. But do you want to talk about the risk management side? We asked you before how that factored into all this, and you weren't able to answer. Again, my apologies. But do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, the biggest problem is that sometimes people get themselves into situations that they don't see coming, and it has to do with being actively situationally aware. And I think it's all about thinking about the risk before you, trying to identify the risk before you go and coming up with a mitigation strategy before you go, then thinking about what changes while you're in the air, and trying to identify the things that have changed, what are the consequences of those changes, and how you could mitigate them. So it's just more active situational awareness. If people don't have the habit of it, they don't have the training to do it, and I think that's the purpose of all of this, is to try and get pilots who know what's happening now and what might happen next if they don't do something about it.
Phil?
Okay. First off, John, I want to thank you for the really generous offer of the big discount off the training video. For all the NAFI members on here, I don't see how you don't do anything but get that. I will throw over here in a minute to see if ASA has products as well oriented toward the transition. Also, we opened up the webinar tonight. Normally our NAFI webinars are closed except to NAFI members, and we decided this was an important enough topic to make it available to anybody that wanted to come in and listen. Of course, in doing that, we're certainly hopeful that you'll see the value of NAFI membership, and for the money you can save on the King video, you could be able to join for several years. So I would encourage you to, if you like what you're seeing here tonight, to get onto the NAFI webpage and join. We have the Mentor magazine published 6 times a year, a number of other publications and professional attributes that we can share with our members. We also are volunteer organizations. We're also inviting people to get involved in the work of NAFI. So if you think something like that is of interest to you, then you should also, if you're not already a member, consider joining. Jackie, let me throw it back to you on that point that we raised. Does ASA have product or material that you're bringing out at this time to support the ACS?
Yeah, we'll have the ACS themselves comparable to the printed practical test standard books. We will have the printed ACS books available by the end of June. They will start shipping as well. So for folks that like to use the printed books, they will still be available for the ACS. I've seen a couple of questions come online asking when our test prep materials will be updated. We've been updating all along as the FAA made changes to the tests. We updated our materials accordingly. So this hasn't been a huge change cycle for this June. These have been incremental changes that have been made all along. So it hasn't been a big burden or anything to keep up with materials to make sure that they're consistent with the test being given. So the 2017 materials will start shipping the end of June, and all the updates for the existing people using materials 2015-16, those will also be available by the end of June.
I'm going to throw.
Also, Phil, you didn't ask, but I wanted to just jump in on some of John's comment on risk management. That the biggest key to why we added risk management was not so much testing somebody's judgment of their individual performance, but it was awareness of which risks were specific to that task. So I think that's the most important component to having the risk management associated with each task, in that we've defined which risks are specific to those tasks. For example, ground reference maneuvers, that's one place that it's particularly important to be aware of wire strike avoidance procedures. So things like that, where we were able to take the special emphasis items and put them in context to where they are most important for what you're actually doing. If you're flying low to the ground, you need to be more aware of collision avoidance, controlled flight into terrain, wire strike avoidance, and things like that.
Buzzards. I had to throw that in because I had a nasty midair with a buzzard a few years ago, climbing up out of an airport. I'm going to John, did you want to make a comment? I thought I heard you before I interrupt.
I asked a question about ForeFlight and iPads in the cockpit, and in this.
That's what I was going to ask about. Good.
In this demonstration practical test that we did using ACS standards on the video, I showed using the iPad for both my sectional charts and my checklist, and used it all the way throughout. And we had extra batteries and so on. Plus, I had all the charts, paper charts on board in the airplane, and told the examiner that I did. But I just think iPad is such a powerful tool, and I think a person needs to learn to use it during the training, and I think they should be able to demonstrate it on the practical test.
I have to share something with everybody. I ran into, most of you know that I live in Omaha, and I ran into John and Martha at an FBO where I hang out. And I was, first of all, surprised that they were there. Second, a little miffed they hadn't let me know in advance so I couldn't buy them lunch, because they were just there on a refueling stop. And then third, they were there busily working away on their iPads, working on their flight plan from Omaha to Montreal.
Well, I think an iPad is a powerful tool, and I think it's a great safety tool. But people need to know how to use it and how to manage it as a risk, because it's also a risk factor.
Yep. And I have to give a shout out to Jackie. One of the great resources that we have in the industry, as far as products are concerned, is Jackie is the nice person who takes the updates out of the Federal Register and lists them and puts those nice black highlights in the printed version of the FAR Airman, the ASA printed version. So, and I know that's a lot of work, Jackie, and I, as an instructor, I appreciate that. I really do.
Thanks, Bob. It's my morning coffee is the Morning Federal Register.
Wow.
I'm not going to comment that one.
So is there anything else, and we've given kind of short shrift to John King. I apologize because of the technical issues. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? There is no hard limit on when we end these. I don't want to go much more than about another 10, 15 minutes, but if anybody's got any questions they'd like to post to the group, we've got some really great people here who are more than happy.
This is Susan. I've been answering some of them all along, but
yep.
I really want to, if you could bring back up the resources page, John, Bob. I think, what I really want to encourage everybody to do is bookmark those resources. Go look at them, subscribe to the page. You can subscribe to the Airman testing page, which is the first link up there, and that will send you updates. But I know that in the past, maybe people didn't have much faith in that information because up until about a year and a half ago, it was not regularly updated. I can promise you that at this point, it is updated at least every time there is a new test cycle, and often even more often than that. So the information you see up there, the documents have dates on them. It's very current. We have put as much information as we possibly can about the ACS. There's a PowerPoint presentation. There's a brochure. There are ACSs. There are sample tests. There are frequently asked questions. I think we have some of the questions that I saw here tonight are actually answered on that frequently asked questions document. So please take a look at that as a resource, and if there are any questions that you have that are not covered there, then that's when you can send an email to the ACS Focus Team, which is the address at the bottom, and we will see that and we will get back to you.
Okay. A couple of questions have come up. One is open to the whole group from David Schrader. I'll let you deal with that, Susan. Ron T., that's all we have as an initial. What does this mean for CFIs helping prepare students for their knowledge test? And I'll throw that out to the group. I think I know what it means, but you're the folks on the committee. I'm going to toss that one to John initially because, again, I feel a little bad that his participation has been limited tonight. So, John, what do you think?
Well, the FAA still provides sample knowledge tests on their website, AFS 630's website, and they're not much change. They're just better. They're more relevant. They're not trivial, and I think if people have a good understanding of the underlying knowledge that all pilots ought to know, they're not going to have trouble with the knowledge tests. I think they're far better than they used to be.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the keys to that, John, is that it's sort of the head feint that we've actually, as Susan mentioned earlier, we've been running basically the new questions here for a while, and they fit right in with nobody complaining about them or saying, oh, these are unreasonable or anything like that. And so as the test rolls have been updated and coming out, that had all been converted over to where they directly tied into the ACS standards back several months ago. And so I believe I'm right, there have been 2 test rolls with revised questions, haven't there?
We get a lot of feedback. Yeah, there have been. We get a lot of feedback from people who've used our courses. We ask them for feedback, and many times people will say, I got a question that I hadn't seen before, but I knew how to answer it, so everything was great. And I think that's the answer is that we don't want people memorizing specific questions. We don't want them to have the knowledge so that they can answer the question.
Yeah, and that's the whole point in the very beginning, how this process began was a change in a flight instructor exam that had a big failure rate increase, and questions came about why that was. And there was a question, was it rote memory? And when we dug into it, it wasn't rote memory, it was defective questions. And so it's interesting that a major part of what this is about is to get the rote memory out of it so that if you have the knowledge, you shouldn't have any difficulty answering the questions.
Okay. So everybody, go ahead, John.
All right.
No, all I was going to say is if anybody's wondering why I'm bouncing back and forth on the slides, a couple of people have asked me to go back so they could take a couple of quick notes. So that's what that's about. I will go back to the resource page here in about 30 seconds. I was going to bring it up.
Bob, let me ask you a question. Just, do we record all of these questions that are coming in?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because what we'll do, I don't know how we'll do it, but it'll be on the NAFI side, so you need to join NAFI to see it if you're not already a member. But I'll make a commitment to come back and working with others to answer all of the questions so that we will get to all of them that have been asked tonight. That may be a week or 2 before it's up, but we'll get that up as quickly as we can.
Keep in mind, though, that some of the questions are actually addressed already in the materials. So take a look at those, because I think you'll find an enormous amount of information available already.
Yeah, I mentioned that one of the sites that in my talking with instructors that a number really hadn't paid much attention to or weren't aware of is on the FAA website, the training and testing section. When you first go into FAA.gov, up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a link to training and testing. And if you get in there, that's where a lot of the things that Susan has linked to here and material that we've been talking about. Somebody asked about the revision of the handbooks. That's kind of a continuous process, and you can always see what the most recent handbooks are on that page.
I wanted to mention something too. You had talked about the sample exams, and John, you had mentioned as well. The sample exams come up every time our working group gets together. That is how the FAA communicates to the industry and the working group at large what's changed, but it's also how the industry then provides input back to the FAA. So the ACS has been the platform for a continuous system for improvement. So I would invite everybody, if you see a question on the sample exam that you don't think should be there, you don't think it's relevant or meaningful or it's tricky or could be better phrased or something like that, the FAA now has a method by which they can receive that information, process improvements for the next cycle, and then we'll see changes again on the next test roll. So it's this continuum of improvements that I've never seen before.
It really, really is. We take that very seriously. And I want to tell you that, so again, up until about 18 months ago, maybe a couple of years now, it used to be that those sample tests were they were really kind of an afterthought. They were just there, and we have gone through them with great care, and all of the questions on the sample tests have been through the same kind of board review that real questions get. We know that there's still plenty of room for improvement in the sample test, and we are going to get there. But every time we do them, we try to make them a little bit better than they were last time. So just as Jackie said, the working group doesn't hesitate to let us know when they think we've got something on there that needs to be fixed, and we do it. We really make an effort to do it.
And John King, one of our participants tonight, asked about your product in particular. You can't find the ACS video on the King website?
Yeah, I saw that, and we're answering it right now. I've actually Martha's typing it for me, but the answer is it's just a practical test course, and if you go look at the practical test course, it will say that it's now based on the ACS standard.
Okay.
It is completely redone. Will it be 2 weeks before we show it? End of June. Okay, Martha straightened me out as is the case. And it'll be the end of June when it becomes available.
All right, great. Okay, and unless there's anything else anybody wants to bring up, I mean, there's been a lot of stuff here tonight. I really, really appreciate everybody participating. This has been one of our more heavily populated or viewed webinars, listened to webinars. I'm going to just bring up one quick thing. We will put the links up on the NAFI website so people can get to them. I will talk to John Niehaus tomorrow, and we'll make sure that these links are available to everybody. We'll at a minimum they'll be available to members, and because it's important enough, we'll probably I suspect we'll put them up on the public side of the page so people can get to them. Phil,
before we go, John, Bob, there was one thing I wanted to bring up because it's just been one of the things that's been a real bee in my bonnet, and that is there's been several different places that folks have written about basically how the ACS is a bunch of non-pilots and people that don't know what they're doing, and the test questions are all written by non-pilots, and the one that really got my goat was twice somebody pretty well known in the industry attacked our non-pilot educational psychologists. And so that's what I like to use as an example of the kind of background we have. One of our educational psychologists is the chair of an aviation department of one of the largest aviation university programs. It has an ATP and the time that goes along with that. The other one is a former airline captain, type rated in a 75, 767, 737, MD-80, YS-11, almost any airplane that begins with G, the whole Gulfstream line. Has a gazillion flight hours, currently works as a 135 pilot in an amphibian or a seaplane down in the Caribbean, consults with NASA, and is a fellow at the Royal Aeronautical Society. That's about half her qualifications. So if you hear how the folks don't have much background, believe me, they're not all quite like that person, but I'm not often intimidated in a group of, as far as my credentials against the next guys. But this has been a group that's happened quite a bit. I have a lot of respect for the people on the committee, and there's not anybody in there that doesn't know what they're doing when it comes to flying. So I just wanted to get that out for folks and give you assurance that the process has been run by folks that not only are interested in the management and administration of this, but are 100% capable and interested in the aviation side of it as well.
Bob,
And
can I make a comment?
This is Susan. Oh, go ahead.
John, go ahead.
What I was just going to say is a lot of times it's better to do the right things than to do things perfectly. And this will get better as we go along. We haven't done it perfectly, but we're headed in the right direction. I'd rather be headed in the right direction imperfectly than holding a precise heading going 180 degrees off course. And I think we're on course. We may not have our heading completely perfect, but we're doing the right things.
Well said. Susan?
Yeah, I want to make sure that we don't get off without saying a huge thank you to the organizations and the people, certainly to Jackie, Phil, Bob with NAFI, and yes, Phil, John, everybody who's been part of the working group has, just like Phil said at the beginning, has contributed volunteer time, effort, absolutely huge. I cannot think of anything where so many people from so many different backgrounds have come together, put aside their professional differences, and then, as Jackie has pointed out, these are a lot of competitors in some cases getting together, but it is all because everybody believes in the same goal. And every single person who's been involved in this is just passionate about getting testing and training right. We care, and it's not perfect, but we believe it's better than it was, and we're going to keep at it because this is one of the things that I think we all believe will make a difference in a good way. But I thank the folks who have been part of this at some point over the last 5 years, but most of these people have been involved for the full 5 years, and we're not done yet. So we have lots more still to do, but we owe them a lot.
Okay. Jackie, you got anything you want to add?
No, I just echo everybody's sentiments. It's been an awesome experience. It's been very rewarding to see the ACS come to fruition. It has been a lot of work, but it's been, like John said, it's moving in the right direction with everybody aligned for the better of safety. And I truly believe that this is going to result in more relevant training, testing, and ultimately safer pilots.
I think from my perspective, in NAFI's support of the project and also with the other organizations, and ranging from SAFE to all of the NAFI, SAFE, all of the professional organizations, AOPA, couldn't get to it, EAA, the private and public partnership here with publishers, manufacturers, and so on. This has been a great thing to watch come to fruition. From NAFI's perspective, I think it will make things easier for instructors. I think it will make things easier for students, and I think it's going to clarify things for the inspectors and examiners out there. So I think it's all a wonderful thing. John Booz.
Yeah, and Bob, on that note, too, I would like to throw some kudos back right at the FAA. This not only is it the industry side that has come together like we've never done before, but the FAA agency as a whole, I've never seen the level of cooperation between the various divisions like we've seen with this project. It's just fantastic to see all of the FAA divisions coming together for the same purpose, with the same goal, with the same agenda. It's just been really fantastic to see.
Yeah. Well, I got to thank Susan for her work and the people she's working with at the FAA. I know off the record there are a couple of senior people I've spoken to. Since it was off the record, I can't quote them directly, but I will just say that they've been very supportive and they've been excited about this coming along. So it's been great. I'm going to quote John Booz, who posted on our site, "This is great. We have references to the practical test and to the knowledge material, or to the practical side and the knowledge material, which is a compliment." Phil, anything you want to say in closing before I sum everything up for the night?
I just want to thank our guests tonight, Jackie, John, and Susan, for taking their time and supporting this. That's always very, very helpful in getting the word out, and thank them for their time as participants in the process, as well as all of the other folks that have participated. And as Susan said, spent an enormous amount of time. It's got to be in the tens of thousands of hours at this point. And kudos to the FAA. I'll mention a couple of the folks that I suspect are probably the ones you're talking about. John Duncan at the head of flight standards has certainly been very much behind this process. And then there are others, but the two major key ones that, at least from my perspective, we've interacted with. Van Kern from AFS, correct me if I got the numbers wrong, he's 600. And then 630, the name just went out of my head.
Jim Viola from 800.
Oh, Jim was 1 in 800, and Bob Newell in 630.
So
all of them have really set the standard for their teams, and their teams have been cooperative. And as Jackie said, I've been working with this kind of FAA industry relationship going back to the early 90s, and this is by far the best cooperation I've ever seen all the way around. Industry to industry, industry to feds, feds to feds, feds to industry. The whole side has been really in the sense of working together and resolving differences to create a really fantastic product.
So when everybody pulls together, good things happen. So with that in mind, we're coming up. It's officially still spring, but I can tell you in Omaha, Nebraska, it is 97 degrees. So I don't know what summer's going to be like. So summertime flying is here. Everybody knows I close these out with, and in honor of John King, I always say fly safe, but let's do it a little different. Please consider the risks. Teach your students to consider the risks, everything from dehydration to the summer pop-ups. It's that time of year. Be very careful out there. I don't want to read about anybody on this call other than they got some sort of wonderful award. So on that note, we will meet again on July 20th. Watch eMentor to see what the presentation will be. And I want to thank Phil, John King. Again, I apologize, John. I owe you lunch, John.
I think you heard plenty from me.
John King, Jackie Spanitz, and last but very certainly not least, Susan Parson, who has just been a great friend to all of us in the industry working on this project.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good
Thanks,
night.
and we'll see you next month.